It's Zag Talk. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Jonah, good to be back.
It's always good to be back. And today we're joined by Gita Gupta, who's going to talk all about the most exciting, sexy topic there is: insurance, risk, fraud, all the things that you don't want to think about when you have a mobility startup, but you absolutely should be thinking about because if you don't get those priced in and working into your operations, you're DOA. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then also our friends from Zag Daily have a field report from Eurobike in messy Frankfurt. So that's going to be, I think, pretty bike-tastic. What else is new?
I do look forward to the upcoming bike dispatch. Just underscores number one, like, is that bigger than the Frankfurt Auto Show at this point? That's the same venue, so I'd be curious how that valence is going these days.
Europe loves a big trade show.
They really do, and they're big Frankfurt convention centers. But also, like, it sort of says something about sort of like the European vibe. Like, it's impossible to imagine an event of that scale in the States. Like, we're here talking about autonomy and robots and drones, and Europe is like, we're going to have the biggest bike show in the world, and China's got, electric vehicles rolling out all over the place. Just shows, like, once again, the whole China, US, European, different kinds of governance thing. So that really jumps out at me. I'm looking forward to that report.
Yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun. Before we get to all the hard-hitting mobility news, a little fun item over the weekend. There's no mobility urbanism without urbanism. So I got to do a preview of the new Peter Zumthor building at LACMA here in Los Angeles. And this will suffer from the classic describing the thing you saw, but oh my gosh.
Are you going to dance about architecture for me, Jonah?
I'm going to... People will hear me dance about architecture, but we did it when you were at the Venice Biennale, right, Greg? So we can do it for me. But
absolutely.
I don't know, when you go into a new building and it just feels revelatory, when you sense like, oh, this is what a church must have been like if you were, in the 1500s. So, the interplay with the views of the city, the light, the sort of, organic form, concrete, glass, steel, just floating over Wilshire Boulevard. So if you're not as much of a dork as Greg and I, folks, Google Peter Zumthor LACMA and ooh and ah at those photos. But it's nice to look at something and be like, oh, this is good, especially in these dark days.
I'm glad it delivers. That building took no shortage of criticism when the renderings were first unveiled for it there, particularly the straddling of Wilshire. So I'm glad he pulled it off. Very Zumthorian, it sounds like.
Very Zumthorian. I mean, I will say this was like a preview event where they filled it with Kamasi Washington. Basically had like multiple jazz ensembles sort of throughout the building. And so acoustically, it was fascinating. But there wasn't any art in it, obviously, other than the performance in the building itself. So jury is still out how it does as a museum. This is me judging it as a singular piece of art itself. But as a museum, come back in a year. Let's see.
Yes, I would say the comparison there will be Zaha Hadid's Maxi in Rome, which I dropped in on when I was in Italy in May. And yes, as a sculptural form itself, it's incredible. Not really sure about a gallery space, which goes all the way back to Gary for Bilbao as well, too. So we can go on and on. All the state museums are actually not that great at being museums, as it turns out.
Yes, and I think Zaha also built a fire station that couldn't fit any fire trucks. So
Glad you brought it right back to mobility there. Yeah, where were the traffic engineers then, folks?
But speaking of mobility, plenty to sink our teeth into this week. A lot of AV news, but the first one is it's as much AV as it is a bromance, a budding bromance. Are they back together again? Uber, Travis K, Dara, will they, won't they? But really enjoyed this New York Times piece. Basically, Uber ex-CEO Travis Kalanick, the founder who had his bitter ousting, he's dancing with the current CEO, Dara, to basically figure out, can Travis buy Pony.ai's US arm, which has to be spun out because we're in a soft war with China these days, and then somehow fold it in under Uber's operations? Like, details still a little unclear, but like, gosh, moving parts and moving personalities.
Yeah, the M&A piece is a bit lost to me there in terms of how that would work. It is interesting that Travis K did, I don't think openly badmouth Dara, but certainly let it be known that he had no faith in Dara when he was pushed out. They brought him in to turn Uber into Expedia for the rest of us. But it is interesting to see them back together. And my favorite comment on this is the Riley Brennan from his newsletter, which is like, everybody who got out of doing AV software research is now getting back in. Like, Uber shut down, much to Travis was a huge supporter of Uber's autonomy division and was aghast when they shut it down. So now trying to bring that back in, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, which will dovetail in a moment to our next item here about all the other interesting software players getting into this. But yes, are we all going to see every major OEM is going to start this up again? Is Argo coming back from the dead? I don't know if it's too soon.
Have any lessons been learned?
Jokes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
no, and Uber's stock price has been on a tear lately, right? That they're I think 200 billion or so market cap now, so like they can kind of afford to think big once more. I think they were kind of brought in Dara to get the ship efficient enough to turn a profit, and then once you do that, you can go back to dreaming big. But will they come back to the flying taxi part of the business? Is that ever gonna
Right.
rear its ugly head?
That one's hard to imagine there, but it will be interesting to see. Like, this is all part of those also greater strategic questions still unanswered of like, are you gonna be Waymo where you own your own fleet of the vehicle? Is Waymo just simply a provider to an Uber? Do you do the Tesla where like you offer autonomy as a feature and people rent out their cars as robo taxis by night kind of thing? I don't know. This is, I guess, the Travis K like control your own destiny thing. Certainly, maybe is his way to control Uber's destiny once and again. Watch your back, Dara.
I think we will let the market decide which version plays out. I suppose it's fun to watch. Speaking of
Well,
up in the air, another got a new approach for self-driving. What could go
I was to
wrong?
say, also, speaking of rational markets, how rational could markets be when, yes, in this particular case, OpenAI, Sam Altman, has got another story up his sleeve here to keep that valuation up, that they too want to work on self-driving car technology. Correct me if I'm wrong here. The details are a little bit hazy about this. They want to use Sora and some of their vision model stuff here, but like,
The details are
do they
incredibly
actually even
hazy.
acknowledge they actually have a technology stack to do this, or is this just Sam like once again talking on a podcast?
It was mostly him talking on a podcast. It could also be like, SoftBank's attention was waning. If we just say, self-driving, 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 another $1 trillion will appear in our
Well,
hat.
they had to scrape all their sites of the IO as that lawsuit goes on. If listeners are aware of this one, where like the whole Johnny Ive like we're starting a new bromance, and then it's revealed that they were talking to another startup named IO that also had an AI device, and there is an injunction followed by I think the next hearings in December. So you won't get to see their photos on the OpenAI website for some time. So hence the pivot to self-driving cars, perhaps.
And that would be a fun twist if they then brought Johnny Ive back in to design the car and it was all, Apple Car 2.0.
That would be truly the funniest outcome of this. I should note, by the way, that Waymo very quietly last winter, published a paper and did some reveals of their own Waymo Foundation model. I interpreted at the time, and listeners will correct me if I'm wrong, as I frequently am, but I interpreted at the time as Waymo being like, oh yeah, we could totally do a large vision model approach to this. Like, yeah, we've got one. We could do it this way, but they're sticking with their approach. But it seems like this is what NVIDIA is perhaps going to do, and now we have OpenAI talking about doing the same sort of thing. So it will be interesting to see if these models can leapfrog the painstaking approach that Waymo has taken until now.
Well, if one company believes in leapfrogging and throwing those damn regulations out the door, how's Tesla's robotaxi launch going, Greg?
Oh, it's going great, Jonah. Man, listeners, get yourself over to Reddit to follow the threads, and of course, various news outlets are tracking this. The Tesla robotaxi launch, just incredible documentations of phantom braking, where the car just slams to a halt for no apparent reason, something the sensors picked up and misinterpreted. Also, dropping off passengers in the middle of a busy intersection, I think, was one of my favorites.
Whoopsie.
But yeah, to your point there, like Tesla, all continuing its secret sauce of treating all of its customers as live fire test crash dummies in its model refinement and intelligence gathering opportunities here.
My favorite list of little oopsies they did in the past week of launch was driving into oncoming traffic lane, which is just like, you'd think, especially with the cameras, like you could see where those double yellow lines are, but oh well. I mean, fortunately, it doesn't seem like anyone's been seriously hurt so far. So it's
Yes, that's why we can laugh about this. This
yeah.
has not turned into that one, but it is funny. Like, this is their like, this is not free range, robo taxis. This is within their own operational design domain, and like, this is still happening. So I'd be curious to see how quickly they expand this.
I
Probably
do
very
like that
rapidly.
they've sort of seemingly scared even Texas enough that Texas actually has like a mild self-driving car regulation of, kit of rules finally going into effect. I mean, honestly, that's I think the real thing to watch here is that if enough AVs behave badly, people will react and we might end up with stronger regulatory environment than the AV companies want. So there's a reason to be on your best behavior, and it's a little worrisome if Tesla kind of pees in the pool for everyone, huh?
That's what they're sort of best at there. Well, speaking of the safe approach here, Waymo coming to the final boss of autonomy in cities. They're coming to New York, but evidently they're going to have a driver behind the wheel. They're going to play it safe. I'm curious your thoughts on this, Jonah. Like, can they make it in New York? If you can make it there, you can, in fact, maybe make it anywhere.
I mean, it's the final boss of maybe American cities, right? But they're also, we've got AVs working on Tokyo, we've got AVs working on London. Like, there's other cities with iconic taxi industries and, crazy drivers, windy roads, and plenty of trains. So, in that sense, on a global scale, I think the New York thing is less impressive, but it's certainly, I would say, more impressive than Phoenix.
I would say my New York exceptionalism or provincialism takes issue with this by you. Like, there's no more edge cases after New York. It is the most edge casey city in the world there.
That's true. If you can deal with like the Times Square cowboy, you can deal with any sort of pedestrian.
Exactly. Like that, the woman in a wheelchair chasing a duck, as Chris Urmson famously put out there. No, New York, that's like every street in New York every single day. Which brings us to, we have to tie in mobility, the ultimate political edge case in the States there of a Democratic candidate for mayor after winning the primary, Zoran Mamdani, the 33-year-old, who I would say, I bring this up for our mobility nerds, and whatever else you think of his agenda, it'll be very interesting to see if he can bring his campaign promise of fast and free buses for New Yorkers, because the total consensus in mobility circles is that you cannot have both. You can have free buses, which has some positives and some definite negative externalities, but also, basically leads to declines in service because you've made them free. And so it'd be very interesting. There's some big pushback already from the Partnership for New York City and some other private sector voices. Jarrett Walker, the bus designer and bus mobility consultant, is a skeptic of this plan. It'll be fascinating to see if they can pull this off. I'm inclined to think that they will probably try to do it free and might see some negative externalities. And what do they do then becomes the question. But yeah, are you feeling the Zoran?
I mean, it's been exciting to watch every centrist institution unite against trying to stab him in the back now that he's a Democratic candidate.
Better things
really
aren't
rallying
possible,
around
Jonah.
the flag there.
Better things are not possible.
Greg, as much of a leftist as I am, I'm also a technocrat at my heart. So I don't like free buses. I like fast buses. I like affordable buses. But I think the negative externalities of a free bus kind of override. Yes, like someone that needs assistance with the bus, like there should be programs for that. But you want people to basically use the right amount of bus.
I don't know, man. Well, we'll see how this plays out in the commie corridor of Queens and Brooklyn, as the New York Times has just started openly calling it. So I know we'll deploy it first. But what if, Jonah? What if I told you the buses were autonomous? Because Beep is launching a fully autonomous public transit system in Florida. I'd be curious to take on this one, because like looking at the typology, the form factor of the bus, this looks like microtransit all over again, only now with autonomy. But Can they pull it off?
A little two-for story here. So Beep also raising a $52.7 million round with Intel Capital, Blue Lagoon Capital co-leading it. But launching in Jacksonville, not exactly a hot spot for transportation. They are pretty small shuttles, as you said, like kind of, looks like little 8-seaters, which it might be about all the people you need to fill a bus in northern Florida. I've always liked that Jacksonville had a storied piece of autonomous transit in its past. They were one of the few cities that got a people mover in that kind of 80s techno heyday. I think they've maybe just dismantled it because they basically couldn't figure out how to repair it anymore. But that was at least an autonomous vehicle that wasn't stuck in traffic.
Many such cases.
And it went bye-bye. And so it's quite possible that some of these kind of AV experiments might go the way of the people mover.
It just goes on and on. I think we've covered this before. It's fascinating to watch people keep trying to reinvent microtransit, being like, maybe this time we'll have enough math to figure out how to sort this. I mean, there's VIA, of course, and there's so many others of what if we just get you close enough to your point in origin of destination to make this rational enough, and we do it. Maybe it'll work in Jacksonville. It is, of course, one of the largest cities by land area in the United States as well because of amalgamation. So a lot of ground to cover there for them.
A lot of swampy ground to cover.
But it's not an autonomous bus. What about autonomous trains? I mean, a lot of trains are autonomous, but we have also autonomous train funding this week, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to throw one out for the foamers, right? Railspire raising $4.6 million. I don't know about that name, Railspire, but basically trying to add level 4 autonomy to the yards, the kind of switching areas. So it's not yet meant to be that basically a 1,000 car long coal train is going to trundle across the country unmanned.
As someone here in Quebec, man, I joke, but yeah, I think, of course, back to the tragedy of Lake Megantic, which was not an autonomous thing. But yes, having large autonomous trains filled with flammable items, we'll come back to this on hackers targeting transportation, but that starts to scare me a little. But yeah, roaming around the yards like giant home train conductors, that's fun. I can imagine that.
Yeah. So keep an eye on this one, folks.
There you go. Big news there. What else we got?
Oh, speaking of trains, what about the fact that everyone's pickup truck is now the size of a freight train? Any problems with that, Greg?
Not at all. Well, as I think listeners are fairly well, are used to this now, is like, of course, because of, the monstrous size of vehicles, and also, of course, of the result of various lawsuits. I think it was the Firestone case there in terms of what happens with your rear pillars, is that basically, yes, my understanding is blind spots are getting worse and worse in vehicles, which is partly why you have all sorts of ADAS systems on vehicles, is because you literally can't see outside your car. But yes. Yeah. So what are the new techniques here that they're putting in?
So new research from USDOT's Volpe Center, which I don't think has been dismantled yet, but give them a couple more days. Basically, since the 90s, blind spots, I guess hard to quantify in a way that makes sense if you're not an engineer, but like the 10-meter radius of visibility fell 58%, and then for other kind of visibility measures down 17%, but basically just like harder to see is the summation. And that makes sense. Yeah, if you've ever been in one of these big cars, if you rent a car in a southern state, they basically force you to get inside a pickup these days. Yeah, you can't see what's in front of the big snout of the truck. You can't see what's behind the bed. So if that's a kid chasing a ball into the street, splat. It's terrible.
So yeah, so take your eyes off the road in that case and look at the big screen mounted on the dash in order to do it. It is kind of it's how people think about these things. I have not forgotten the fact when my older son's friends mocked me. I think for backing up in a car using the rearview mirror and not looking at the screen. And I was like, okay, how will this help you learn to drive a car that is not a current model massive screen ADAS system there? But yeah, people seem to be giving themselves over to the technology. And as we know from various plane crashes and other things, what could go wrong when you give yourself over to the technology?
Yeah,
but yes, but it's good for them to be following these blind spots. Well, we'll get back to that one momentarily, won't we? There. But in the meantime, we got to have some SPAC news, Jonah. We can't have some SPAC news without SPAC news.
I would love to know if anyone cares about this besides you and I, but bear with us,
regulators,
dear listeners.
Hopefully.
So Greg and I are always debating, are we so back? And SPACs, we've got the numbers finally. They are so back. So this year, SPACs, the special purpose acquisition companies, those kind of blank check shell companies that startups will reverse merge with to go public with less scrutiny, let's say. They've raised $11 billion so far this year, which is about 5 times more than they had last year. They now account for 2/3 of all U.S. IPO volume. And it doesn't seem like we've learned any friggin' lessons from last time, because there's still all sorts of crazy companies with no prospects of making money that are going public. And so just another thing that I like about this, let's kind of remember some of the SPACs that went public in the last boom and how they fared. Like Virgin Galactic, stock down 99%, Lucid Motors down 78%, Grab 61%, like just a bloodbath for retail investors. So kind of sad.
Yeah, there's definitely some members of Silicon Valley High out there whose names I won't bring up here for risk of libeling anyone. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of criticism floating around that some of the companies that were acquired by SPACs perhaps were dogs. Who would have thought so? But yeah, it does seem like that moment. I mean, just even in a broader sense outside of mobility, like in addition to SPACs, I was reading the latest newsletter from Bloomberg's Odd Lots, and Joe Wiesenthal was there complaining the fact that the explosion of companies like MicroStrategy that are just Bitcoin holding companies, like there's like now dozens of companies that have no assets or functions except to just simply be Bitcoin holding companies when there is a Bitcoin ETF. So it makes sense here. We just got money piling into SPACs. Like we'll find something. We'll take it public. We'll see where it goes. The question is like, yeah, what will those mobility companies be? What is the pie in the sky dreams? Is this like the EVTOLs are going to make their splashes this way? Or I'm curious to see like what'll be the next big one here,
Yeah. I'm sure in another week.
Stay tuned.
Exactly.
We'll keep pestering all you listeners with this next episode too. But speaking of AI, this would be my other thing too.
Speaking of good news,
well, it's also like the SPACs. Can you actually assemble a large enough SPAC to ingest some of these AI companies, given the crazy valuations? Like Thinking Machines, which is like pre-concept, and is now valued at $10 billion. So you still can't get enough SPACs to devour that. But yes, what is the latest in AI and like the energy AI nexus?
Yeah. So by 2030, data centers could make a larger share of our carbon emissions than flights do. And flights are kind of famously a pretty big burner of fossil fuels. So
I just have to say, Joan, if I promise not to use AI, can I fly as much as I want? Will I not be looked down on by society for that? That's a crazy thinking.
yeah, instead of a carbon offset where they plant a tree, they just like cancel your ChatGPT subscription for a couple months. But yeah, basically projecting by 2030, data centers, AI data centers, I should say, would account for 3.4% of global CO2 emissions, whereas aviation is currently at 2.5%. That's a lot of extra carbon emitted and a lot of couple more Celsius on the old heat map, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I think there's a number of these reports going out right now about the incredible hockey stick line going up of the projected energy consumption. I think I just saw on either Blue Sky or Zombie Twitter, someone was ripping out pages from a UBS report where showing that because of the switch to agentic systems, which of course have a lot more inference as they are thinking and learning at the edge in response to the prompt, that you'll have this massive exponential up there because the training data is one thing and the huge training energy needs, but then the ongoing inference there, which is relatively smaller today, will cause that sort of explosion in growth. So yes, if OpenAI builds its world of autonomous OpenAI taxis, then I think we can continue to expect that line to go up.
And I should say to try and have a optimistic or at least a glimmer of hope, right? Aviation, as a comparison point here, famously hard to decarbonize because you can't do an electric plane at scale yet. You don't have the kind of energy density. You can't plug in a plane, unfortunately. But obviously, there would be ways to do greener things that are connected to the grid, right? So we could have solar-powered AI data centers. We could have nuclear data centers. So, we sort of having this nationwide debate about abundance. Should we make it easier to permit new high power transmission lines, right? Like, so it all kind of ties together. So I don't know. Will these all just be like AI data centers in some little, small country that decides to just go ham with building nuclear power plants?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yeah. I mean, based on the stuff. Now we're drifting into being an AI podcast, but I will say I've been doing some. I've been hosting panels for
Promise
Fast
we
Company.
won't.
At South by Southwest and elsewhere, and it was very interesting to me that if you talk to the bandwidth companies, if you talk to the energy companies, and you talk to the compute companies, and even like a REIT that specializes in data centers, they're all in agreement that basically data center construction is all moving towards the direction of available energy supply. So wherever you can actually get the energy hookup, the electricity hookup into the data center, that's where they want to build it. And that's why you're seeing a lot of stuff in the Southwest and other places where you think of there's no water, but it's all following that. So yeah, so it'd be interesting to see some, the Emirates or
Put
somebody
them
else.
in Iceland. Tap into that geothermal, baby.
That's it. If Iceland did some crazy geothermal build out, they would go there just like the original cloud companies were going to places like Oregon for the hydroelectric stuff back in the day. I mean, Google's original cloud data centers were targeting those kinds of undervalued, underpriced, sources of renewable power. So yeah, perhaps we could see something like that, or some nation going totally rogue and doing a crash nuclear power building program. That would
Do
probably
it
be
in
an
Iran.
Emerald or something like that. Yeah, it would be. Yes, they've got the facilities for now. Perhaps we'll
The
get some
thing
more
that I
satellite
haven't
photos.
understood about this is with a lot of data centers, you need them, sort of positioned throughout the country, throughout the world, because you don't want the latency of a faraway data center. But for something like AI, latency is actually not usually as important. You're usually already being constrained by the actual computing that has to happen, and then you're just generating text, which is going to come a lot faster than if you're doing video or gaming. So yeah, we could put these somewhere where the energy is greener, and then you spend an extra 10 milliseconds getting the information across. But
I don't know, man. If it's driving my car, I don't know if I want it to have that kind of lag there, Jonah. I don't know.
okay, not for that, but for when people are telling ChatGPT draw me this funny thing.
Reveal that 2.9% of Claude conversations are of a personal and or romantic nature. So yes, the future is riding around in our OpenAI electric taxis having conversations with our AI partners. Can't wait. That'll be good.
Just like
Yeah, well, there you go. And what if her is incepted here? That brings us to our last little item out there in the world for our partners over at Zag. But yes, the FBI has warned and sounding alarm to other cybersecurity firms that there is a shadowy hacker group that is now launching cyber attacks on various airlines. And Jonah, what is their name? What is their extremely metal name?
watch out, world. It's Scattered Spider.
Scattered Spider.
I mean, you have to, keep in mind most hacking groups are led by like angry 15-year-olds, so the names make sense then.
Tell me you're led by a bunch of ADHD people. I say as someone diagnosed myself. Tell me you're led by a bunch of ADHDers than scattered spider. Like we can't even focus here. We're
Well, if you
scattered all
think
over.
about it, like, 20 years ago, these same kids, they would have made that the name of their bad, garage rock band. And so now you channel that energy into taking down some, international airlines.
There you go. And I would say, again, it's a harbinger there. There's been lots of work. I've done work with the Army Cyber Institute, and there's been other cases. New York Magazine once famously did a scenario imagining a huge attack on autonomous vehicles that would cause them to crash, et cetera, there, system level stuff. So certainly nothing to sneeze at. It is interesting going after airlines there as a starting point. But yeah, a lot of vital systems, a lot of downtime, easy to disrupt, easy to do ransomware. It makes sense. They have a lot of point of failures and a lot of legacy systems. A lot of COBOL running over on the mainframes of those big
Yeah, although
pipelines and
those will
ticketing
probably be the
systems.
last thing that they actually hack, right? The COBOL, that's probably the safest stuff there is.
That's probably true.
But yeah, I guess listeners, watch out for any phishing emails. And then before we get to our big exclusive this week, a couple Zag stories that folks might have missed, and I think honestly worth hitting Zag for. First one was a little behind the scenes about Third Lane Mobility's turnaround. So Third Lane, sort of the holding company name for Bird Canada, Spin. And so basically they were bleeding money, and they've basically swung things around by 50 million bucks. And yeah, anyone out there that wants to know how you did it, you got to look at this piece. But basically, more vehicle types, getting their operations leaner, kind of doubling down on the cities that worked. I've certainly here in Los Angeles seen more Bird vehicles than I did a couple months ago, so it's palpable on the ground. And it's happy to see this one work because I like them scooters.
Yeah, man, micromobility is still a great idea, and particularly in our denser urban environments. I say it's interesting being in Montreal, where they've never really permitted that in favor of their own Bixby system. I don't think about it much, but when I was in Europe last month, yeah, thinking a lot about all the typologies that were out there and how well utilized they were. So yeah, there's still a future for micromobility. Maybe it's just not the next greatest disruptive force in the universe. That's AI now, but the self-driving scooter. When do we get that? As listeners probably know, I've been advocating for that for at least 7 or 8 years there about like why don't we have self-driving bicycles that can pedal their way over to us, but we're getting there. We're
Yeah,
getting there. We
I
have
know. I know a
toys.
couple people that have tried that, basically to make the rebalancing work or to get
Yeah,
it to you. I like the idea of
before
a self-driving scooter that does that while you're on it, and then you're just like kind of bored and scared.
it's just the scale of the challenge there. If Dmitry Shevelenko is listening, I mean, he was co-founding Tortoise after he left Uber, and now he's like the chief business officer at Perplexity. So I think his priorities are a little
He
different
did
these
well for
days.
himself.
Yeah.
This one I know Greg's going to geek out about, but Regent, makers of Sea Glider, they achieved their first crewed foil mode test. So a real technical milestone. Tell us about this plane, Greg.
Well, Regent's interesting. And by the way, like, when it comes to experimental forms of aircraft, like I like the Regent guys on paper a lot more than I like Boom and the supersonic people. Regent is trading off the idea that you can basically create what they call a sea glider because it relies on ground effect, if you're really nerd about this, which is also what the Spruce Goose did famously back in its day in its only flight, where like as you're close to the water, as physics apply, basically it creates lift when you're like 20 feet above the water. And so yeah, so the idea of what Regent wants to do is to basically use that ground effect force to basically create a sort of coastal mode of transportation. I mean, and you can imagine the geographies. I think they've been very active in South Florida. I think they're active in the Gulf. You can imagine like an Abu Dhabi to Dubai route and up and down the Emirates pretty easily. But yeah, there's
Yeah.
sort of like a regional transportation on this one too. And so yeah, so great for them. And like, yeah, and the deep cut nerds know that like, the most famous example of this was the Akronoplan, which was like this massive Soviet troop transporting the Caspian Sea,
So
which
cool
was the proof
looking.
of concept. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a great plane. William Gibson played with it and stuff. But yeah, I wish them the best of luck on this because like it strikes me as a very sensible way of doing it. And back to like sort of seaplanes like Pan Am and stuff. It's got a certain glamour. You can imagine like going down to the harbor, boarding your sea glider, and like instead of being on traffic in I-95, or you could take the Bright Line, etc. But like just zoom on down on electric, skimming the waves. Sounds
Yeah,
great.
and I should add, it has a sustainability aspect besides being electric. It's inherently a more efficient form of transport than an actual plane because of the way the sort of efficiencies of the ground effect that you mentioned. So you're not fighting gravity as hard. Best of luck, Regent. And then back to a smaller scale, a couple items that are worth checking out. Ilus, I don't know if I'm saying this one right. Let's just put your best Estonian accent on, folks. But a new startup basically launching a modular bike for shared micromobility operators. Pretty cool looking, basically meant to be like a kit of parts, swap in this, swap out that, easier maintenance, easier for different fleet operators to kind of make it their own. So, getting back to the bird turnaround, like I think we're sort of seeing the industry converge towards, what works, right? Like a little less risk taking and experimentation and more just like give the people what they need.
Literal nuts and bolts.
Literal nuts and bolts. And then another nuts and bolts, Rally debuted a new e-bike that I like this one because it's kind of reminds me of like it's got a little bit of that cowboy aesthetic with the kind of streamlined frame, but it's a brand that's obviously been making bikes for 100 plus years, so they're not just going to go belly up and leave you with like a bricked bike. So I'd say honestly, if that's one thing that this kind of micromobility boom bust has done, it's kind of shaken up a bike design industry that kind of hadn't thought about it in maybe 80 years. So it's nice to have some new options out there.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, reading the specs on it, single gear. I love I'd love to know more about the anti-theft features. But yeah, it's good to see. Again, yeah, perhaps this future is going to be individual ownership of these e-bikes and other forms of micromobility rather than the hop on, hop off fleets that go everywhere. So, but I don't know why are we speculating on this when we can cut to Messe Frankfurt?
Yeah, so Europe's biggest cycling trade show took place in Messe Frankfurt. What began as a bicycle expo has transformed into a showcase for everything from e-bikes to mobility tech. Reporting live from Eurobike 2025 for Zag Daily, here's Athena Browning.
It's a warm and bright day here at Messe Frankfurt, which is a good thing considering just how many people are out cycling on the test tracks. This year marks the 33rd Eurobike show, and while the name may still point to a cycling focus, there's much more than just bikes on display. In fact, over 1,500 exhibitors from different sectors are present. Walk along the top floor of the huge glass exhibition hall and you'll see every kind of wheeled machine being demoed from the window. The enormous showroom has even more variety. There's e-bikes, cargo bikes, scooters, trailers, and a few contraptions that don't fit any category at all. I'm standing next to something that looks like a cross between a microcar and a trike. It's on 3 wheels and has a roof, 2 doors, and a reclining seat which onlookers are climbing into. This is French company Sixy's latest invention, an electric vehicle which allows users to pedal at speeds of 120 miles per hour and even requires a driver's license. It's a far cry from the standard bicycle you might imagine at a trade fair, but Sixy's business unit lead believes the sector is changing.
At Sixy, we are also cycling enthusiasts. We come from the cycling world, and therefore that's why we developed that technology with a pedaling feeling. This is super important for us. But we wanted to go a step further and, let's say, answering all the type of applications as well, so that we can try to enlarge a market that is somehow hasn't been changing much in the last decade.
Sixy isn't the only company straying from the traditional bike show offering. In another hall lined with batteries, safety gear and protective wear sits Swedish company Twice Me. For years, they've been building smart safety into helmets, ski gear, and even industrial PPE through embedded NFC chips. While initially designed for medical use, COO Jack Svensson is excited to showcase Twice Me's tech to the bike segment.
For us as a company, it's so much fun to be here this year because most of the visitors, like, I've seen you before, I've seen products in the market, we kind of know you now. Can you tell us a bit about the new things? When we exhibited the first time 3 years ago, it was like, who are you? Tell us about what Twice Me is.
What started as a trade fair for mountain and road bikes now encompasses safety tech, smart city solutions, and much more. So is Eurobike still a fitting name for this event? Before the Congress, we caught up with longtime organizer Stefan Reisinger to talk about what Eurobike has become over the years.
About, I would say, urban mobility. That is what Eurobike is mostly about today. Still we have our kind of sporty heritage, but the main driver and also, of course, the main business the industry was doing over the last 10 years was with this trend towards e-mobility and e-bikes. And today Eurobike is not only a cycling or a bicycle show, it is really an urban mobility show. So we also kind of cover this segment of light electric vehicles, which is everything between, I would say, a cargo bike and a car.
And it's not just the bikes that have changed at Eurobike, it's the conversations too. At a packed-out panel titled East Meets West X Bike Ventures, moderator Elisa Chu led a discussion on the urgent need for a capital reset in cycling. As hardware innovation accelerates across micromobility, panelists argued that traditional VC models built for fast-scaling software startups no longer fit the bill. Striking a bold tone, keynote speaker Ahu Serta warned that Europe's incremental approach could cost it the race.
Slow will kill us. So when Silicon Valley guys are thinking about 1,000% innovation, we are meddling here in Europe with 1% improvement in the automotive sector. That's not going to get us anywhere. So we have to accelerate.
Further conversations at Eurobike highlighted an area where change is still slower: inclusion. At a panel on the future of sports and performance, pro cyclist and advocate Aisha McGowan challenged the lens through which performance cycling is still viewed. She believes that the industry's focus on elite racing and charity narratives misses a huge part of the market and culture.
I appreciate the opportunity to have that platform and be able to, kind of dispel some of the common things that are happening within the industry that have frustrated so many folks like me over the years. And so I'm just happy to be here and be able to talk about stuff like that. Doing enough. I feel like there's so many stories that need to be told beyond professional racers, and I can say that as someone who worked towards becoming one myself. And I think the market's just missing out. Marginalized, Black people have money too, and they want to spend it. They really like bikes.
This discussion of shifting realities, both at Eurobike and in the industry at large, we asked seasoned exhibitors and new attendees how this year's show compared to previous years. Charlie Chang, the CEO of Taiwan-based e-bike systems developer Hyena, has been coming to Eurobike since the pre-COVID years.
I would say, to be honest, it's a bit quiet still, but just on my perspective, I think the market is on the way of recovering, and I'm happy to see actually there are more and more our brand partners talking to us about the new project, and I would say everyone is testing the market in a very careful way. But we also see many other possibilities like this, and people just get new ideas during this period. So.
But what about Hyena's new partners? British startup Convoy has developed an e-trailer that can transform any bike into a family cargo bike in seconds. They're at Eurobike for the first time.
Exciting. I think it's our first kind of exposure into the European market where, trailers and cargo bikes are dominant over here. You always hope it'll have a good reception, but there's a little bit of apprehension, and then seeing it and seeing industry leaders. We had a lot of bike manufacturers drop by who had heard about us. So we're really excited. It feels like it's a long 5 days. We're halfway through, but it's still in good form.
From walking the halls at Eurobike 2025 is that this event is no longer just a product showcase, it's a launchpad. For startups especially, Eurobike has become an invaluable stage. The new startup area, now in its third year, was buzzing with founders pitching everything from anti-theft tech to modular cargo systems. Several early-stage teams we spoke with said the connections they made here could shape their next round of funding or even their future partners. It's a trend that mirrors the shifting gears of the mobility world itself, from a few dominant manufacturers to a broader ecosystem where innovation can come from anywhere. And that spirit of openness is what seems to be drawing people back, whether they're veterans of the bike industry or newcomers trying to rethink the wheel entirely. Athena Browning, Zag Daily.
We're back, and today I'm joined by Gita Gupta, VP, Director of Emerging Technology and Digital Economies, Global Technology Risk Practice at Lockton. Hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I realize I'm so remiss, I forgot to get you a Hallmark card for National Insurance Day.
That's okay. That's quite all right. But I think it's exciting that there's a day to commemorate the awareness of insurance. Apparently, I just found out about it myself. So
This one's climbing the ranks, folks. If you haven't celebrated it yet, you will soon. But no, I think that's the perfect timing for us to talk about insurance, talk about risk, talk about mitigating, ameliorating any mobility economy startup. If you're not thinking about risk, you should be and you will be. So that's why I was so excited to have you on this show because, there's no movement without something possibly going wrong. And if something can go wrong, you need insurance.
absolutely.
So why don't you just give us like a little background? Like, tell us, what do you do at Lockton?
Okay. So I actually recently joined Lockton. I joined this practice about 2 months ago, and the global technology practice is really covering a wide spectrum of technology and risk associated with that. However, I was brought on board because of my specific experience in the sharing economy. Thus, the relationship that I've had with Curbivore over the last couple of years. So before I joined Lockton, which is, of course, in a broker capacity, and I'll explain a little bit about that. But prior to that, I was with Liberty Mutual and helped build Liberty Mutual's mobility practice over the last 6 years, where my focus was ride hail, primarily ride hail, quite a lot of vehicle subscription programs, either platform or OEM based.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah, exactly, as well as delivery. And I've seen a lot over those 6 years. 2019 to 2025 has been just phenomenal in terms of development in that space, and it's been really exciting. But before that, I spent a number of years at Toyota, where I worked in corporate strategy and actually helped build Toyota's insurance agency and their data aggregator. So I'm a car person who then migrated to an insurance carrier who's now at a broker. So I really have seen kind of the full spectrum as far as the space of mobility, stuff with wheels, as my kids put it.
Stuff that moves. Yeah. Yeah. And to toot your horn, no pun intended, a little bit, Toyota, I think, underappreciated all the innovation that they've tried, whether it's, in their sort of insurance department or things like Quinto car share and kind of flexible ownership models. So smart people trying to, kind of disintermediate mobility there too. But
very exciting time to be at Toyota during those years. I think I mentioned this to you, Jonah. When I first started at Toyota in strategy, as Toyota was making the move to support the future of mobility, we weren't even allowed to expense rides on Uber or Lyft. We could only take taxis because there was a question about, is it safe? Are people really going to use that? So it's kind of fun to look back in history and see the evolution to where we are now.
And good luck getting a taxi to suburban Torrance.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so from that, sort of, you've been on both sides of the fence. What's the sort of practice you're trying to build at Lockton now? Like, what's the concentration? What's different?
What's different, I think, is we've brought together folks that have phenomenal experience in the space of all of technology. The practice itself was started by two individuals that joined Lockton about a year ago and brought a wealth of broking experience and carrier relationship experience, as well as technology client experience. So we're rounding out a practice, and it's very much on the trajectory of growth right now. So it's a very exciting time for us. For myself, it's continuing the relationships I have in the sharing economy, where it may be with existing clients, or it may be with emerging businesses and serving in almost a consultative type of role as people are building businesses. That's the part that I get the most excited about, helping build sustainable businesses, because that's the name of the game.
Yeah. And so speaking of emerging businesses, let's say that I'm Joe or Jane startup founder and I'm doing a mobility or delivery business. What do I need to know? Give me the crash course, the risk and insurance 101.
So we can certainly get into specific types of insurance, but I'm going to sort of lead off with what I think is kind of a North Star, which is this idea that you've got to be risk aware. You can't be risk averse because obviously then you wouldn't be starting something new and exciting in this space.
Yeah,
So
a new
forget
business
about
is
that.
inherently risky to some degree.
It's inherently risky. But you got to be risk aware. So you got to be thinking about what are all the possible challenges that this business could face, even in its beginning stages or as it scales. Because that's really going to be one of the biggest challenges I've actually seen as sharing economy businesses starting up, the struggle that they hit later on. They're not anticipating or looking around corners and thinking about the possibilities of what they can do to mitigate risk. Insurance and managing risk is critical to success. And if the traditional model of insurance is based on years and years of information to make decisions about if an insurance company wants to take a risk and insure something, the challenge is, as a startup, you're going to have to find ways to get around that story. You're going to have to find ways to make folks feel more comfortable about your business. Hence the risk awareness portion being just part of how you build your actual business model.
And you're talking about how, if you have a new business idea, you don't have 100 years of actuarial data to say, okay, every 1 in 1,000 times this adverse outcome happens.
Yeah, and the more visibility you have into, obviously there's the full spectrum of the different types of businesses in the sharing economy, the more access you have to data, the more that you have visibility into who's interacting, let's say it's a platform, who's interacting with your platform, who's on it, how people are getting on it and getting off of it. The more visibility you have to that, the more attractive that is, of course, to investors, but the more attractive it is also to those that potentially could insure that risk.
Yeah.
That is the key part of awareness.
I think, if we were to imagine a three-sided marketplace, a delivery app, a mobility app, there's so many places where things could go wrong, right? Like a car accident, a courier could get hurt in a restaurant. There's identity fraud. There's, interactions between the driver, courier, and the customer. There's just so many touch points. And I have to imagine those are all different sort of classifications of insurance and different products that a company might need.
Of insurable risks.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're all different types of risks. There's general liability, there's commercial auto, there's workers' comp, which may become a little bit of a dicey topic as we're talking about the independent contractor
sure,
challenges, right? So we won't touch that one. There's cyber liability, there's professional liability, there's directors and officers insurance, which is kind of an interesting one when you think about it, when you think about cyber liability and potentially the liability for data breaches, and if the responsibility then can bubble up to the executives that are running this new entity.
If they were negligent.
If they're negligent in the fashion.
Interesting.
Right? And then there's, of course, your excess and umbrella coverage. And so there's a number of different types of insurance that play a role. And there's some that potentially are not even in this list as well. But that's where it's really key as you're building your business to be thinking about who you're partnering with. That's going to help you navigate this somewhat complicated sort of labyrinth of ways to mitigate risk and insure for risk.
Honing in on mobility and delivery specifically, are there particular types of risks that you think are underappreciated or you've seen time and time again just come out and bite a new company in the butt?
Oh gosh.
We don't have to name any names here.
There's quite a list. I will say that in the commercial auto space, one of the biggest headwinds that my clients in the past and my clients currently have faced has been as a result of a very challenging legal environment. So you've got rising costs for vehicle repair. You've also got nuclear verdicts where some of the judgments are millions, multi-million dollar verdicts.
Yeah.
And what that's doing is it's significantly driving up the cost of commercial auto insurance, which of course, again, is the backbone for TNC or Transportation Network Company, DNC delivery businesses. That's, I think, one of the most significant headwinds and biggest challenges. So how do you get around that? It's the partner that you have, insurance carrier that you have in terms of how they fight on your behalf. That's part of it. But another big part of it is what you're doing to make your platform safer. What type of data are you getting? Are your drivers or your participants aware of the cost of insurance? Because that can also, you can't tell them what to do necessarily, but that may drive certain behaviors in terms of how they behave on your platform. So there's a number of
Or
different
shape what kind of
levers.
users are even on
Yeah,
your
or
platform to
shape,
begin with.
or
Yeah.
ultimately even shape who's on your platform,
Yeah.
or who's enticed to be on your platform, or who you may decide to remove from your platform over time.
And I think you're also kind of hitting at what's to a degree a peculiarly American issue, like our highly litigious nature, these nuclear verdicts. I know we've seen in some states, Uber and other big companies sort of trying to shape laws. I think it's in Florida to kind of tamp that down a bit. I was particularly amused to see InDrive, which is like a European TNC. They tried launching in South Florida and then gave up because their fraud costs were too high. But it's also like anyone could have told you that's one of like the worst markets domestically for identity and driver related fraud. So expensive lesson learned.
Well, and geography absolutely plays a role. And I can speak to some of my subscription clients in the past as they contemplate where they want to operate, and in particular states or in particular metros. That plays a role as well. We're in 50 different states with a variety of patchwork of insurance regulations, which also makes it even more complicated too. So the key is really understanding where you're choosing to make your market entrance it's an important factor.
And I suppose that's, again, to your point about like building this in from the ground up, like be smart, choose the right markets, learn where it's easier and cheaper and safer.
And partner well so that you're getting good guidance, because there is quite the graveyard of businesses that may have struggled because they did not necessarily look at the past or have the right partner to help guide them for the future. So that is absolutely critical.
What for those that aren't on the risk side of things, can you even give us a rough sense of what are the costs that we're talking about? If this is a startup in the mobility space, like how much are they paying for insurance?
It depends. It really varies wildly. But I will say, without a doubt, within the sharing economy, if it's not at the get-go, it will be later on that insurance will be one of your most significant expenses. Wow. Thus, the need to build a risk-aware perspective as you're starting and growing and scaling your business is key. Yeah. So very difficult to quantify in action.
Yeah. No, I can tell you from firsthand experience back when we were building, Relay Rides, which became Turo, that insurance, I think we managed to get it off the ground because we found someone that mispriced it for us, and then they got burnt, and it quickly became a rising cost. But I think there's also, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say in the early days, there was a lot of naive capacity. There's a lot of excitement about entering into this space. So you had carriers that were perhaps underpricing, not understanding that would simply not be sustainable. So then businesses would be surprised at their annual renewal with rate that was skyrocketing. And that was a very challenging situation. But that was what we would call naive capacity, folks that just didn't understand. And so now I think we're getting into a situation in sharing economy. It's more mature. You've got, as I like to say, some more mature capacity entering the marketplace, and folks just have a better understanding of what the challenges would be.
One thing that I've always thought is underappreciated in the conversation around moving people away from sort of fixed automotive-based lifestyle to new mobility is how much America underprices insurance for your average motorist. Like you have people driving around with $5 of coverage essentially, and so they're paying 10 cents a month for that. And so then that might work if you're Joe Schmo and you just have this tail risk, or you'll just be in trouble or file personal bankruptcy. But if you're Waymo, if you're Alphabet, you're gonna need a bigger policy, obviously. So can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, well, especially when we're talking about autonomous vehicles is an entirely different animal in terms of liability and figuring out where the liability lies. Because in traditional insurance, right, like to your example about personal auto, the fault is the driver, right? It's you driving your personal car. But once you have an AV, which of course part of Waymo, part of Google, let's say, that complicates it. So liability may fall on the manufacturer, the software developer, the sensor supplier, rather than a human driver. Or there could be a component of that as well. So determining who's at fault requires a lot more analysis and data collection than a simple auto accident where you rear-ended someone at a stoplight. So this then becomes an incredible challenge in this nascent space because there isn't clear-cut rules established in all 50 states as far as how this is to be handled. So it's definitely a more complicated adjustment of claims, but it's also of understanding where the liability actually lies, as it's not with you as a personal driver.
Yeah. I fear that we're just one or two bad accidents away from some intense regulatory changes that might, in a way, overcorrect based if tragedies happen and people get scared.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens now, especially as we see the launch of robotaxi juxtaposed with successful commercialization of Waymo in many markets. So it's going to be very exciting times to see how this all evolves. Because in addition to the liability issue, you've also got concerns about data and privacy and the cost of repair. There's so many factors that are TBD right now. So it's going to be it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, I think to your point again, privacy, data. We've seen so many automakers or other companies in the space saying, "Oh, we'll make an amazing insurance product, and we'll just use all this telemetry and blah 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 blah." And then people will know if they're a good driver, they'll save money. And then it turns out people don't like that, and then laws get written, and you can't do that anymore.
Exactly. And each state handling those differently, which can be a challenge as well. Knowing how to navigate that landscape is really critical.
Yeah. I want to jump from Insurance 101 to 201 for a second. There's a couple terms that I always see bandied about, and I'd love to kind of get into them. Like, what's an insurance captive?
So an insurance captive would be for some larger, more established organizations that choose to retain some of the risk within their own organization through the formation of a captive, which is effectively an insurance company within their own company. So in the ride-hail space, the two large ride-hail players, it is publicly known, they have captives. That is a common tool that they use to effectively mitigate the cost of risk because they are sharing the cost of risk with insurance carriers, but they're also retaining some of it on their own. It is a way to enable them to be able to scale their business and grow
And what about things like, you see like the reinsurance market, maybe you're going to New York, you're going to Bermuda, you're going to London. Is there a certain flavor to where your reinsurer is based?
I don't think so. I think it's really, it's appetite. It's dictated by appetite. And of course, reinsurance is, at its most simple, is insurance for insurance. Right?
Yeah.
It's the insurance behind it. So you've got London markets, you've got Bermuda, you've got a lot of variety of opportunities that are there. But I think it really boils down to appetite.
Yeah. Again, anything else that you think people underappreciate about the space? If you're an entrepreneur, like ways you can be smarter, what are like the new technologies people can incorporate to kind of mitigate some of the bad practices?
I love telematics. and leveraging telematics in any which way that you can. Of course, being mindful of rules about ownership of data and consent. But telematics is key. To be able to get real-time monitoring is something that I previously as a carrier love to see, and now as a broker love to see because I know my carrier partners love to see it. It helps give visibility to what is actually happening within your business. Real-time monitoring is the holy grail. So I think that that's something that if there's an opportunity to be able to get that type of information, and there's device providers out there, there's a lot of ways in which you can utilize that data that comes off of that. I think that that's a really exciting space. And so spending a lot of time myself trying to figure out where that can be leveraged within the sharing economy. I think that's a great opportunity.
Final parting thoughts. What makes you wake up every day excited about mobility, excited about insurance and risk? What's putting the fire underneath you?
Gosh, I would say that it's some of the smartest people that I have ever met coming up with new and exciting ideas. And what I get to do is help them build it into a business that's actually sustainable. Because the goal is, something that's enduring. And thinking about it with that lens, so I've got a strategy background, an insurance background, and of course now as a broker, and of course with a lot of OEM experience sprinkled in, love bringing that knowledge to folks that are truly innovating. And this is really some of the most fun work I can possibly imagine doing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Gita. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.